Well, it is time for another book list. And I know these book lists, you either love them or hate them. I have some people that love it when I do this, and some that do not. But the circumstances, the latest things happening in the world, motivated me to compile this list of books. These are 10 what I would consider important books on false flag events. And of course, a false flag, that terminology is a reference to the old days when ships would conduct dirty business under a different flying the flag of the enemy to blame the enemy for their misdeeds and things like that. But basically, the idea of a false flag for those new to that terminology is that friendly forces, it's typically like blue on blue, like someone falsifies an event, which usually involves actual real-life carnage in order to frame the enemy du jour. So, for instance, let's say you want to make the Spanish look really bad. You blow up one of your own ships and blame the Spanish. So, and typically our attitude about this sort of thing has been, 100 years later or so, we say, oh, shucks, I can't believe we fell for that, or I can't believe that did that. But we'd never have that happen now. So false flag attacks and false flag events are something that usually once you put enough distance, enough decades between the present and that event, then people are less inclined to be shocked by that. In fact, a lot of people will even say, yeah, I always thought that was kind of strange. I always thought something was off with that. But to express skepticism in those events as they are unfolding is official heresy. But the books I have here, and I tried to compile 10 books that are not terribly difficult to find. Some of these are still going to be a little harder to find than others, but for the most part, these are fairly readily available books. And I mainly say that because there's been a few times where I've done book lists like this, and almost all of them are unicorns. So I tried, because I think this is an important topic with all the things happening in the world. I think this is one of those things that the better equipped you are with some of this information, the better off we all are. Because it's kind of like a magic trick. A false flag attack is kind of like a magic trick that once you know it's a trick, even if you don't know exactly how it's done, the fact that you know it's a trick, you're less inclined to fall for it and be motivated by emotion to do something rash. And by the way, I am going to put on my pen. This is for Stand Up to Jewish Hate. I'd just like to point out that I'm doing my part. One of my daughters ordered this for me, so I am going to don this pen so that you can see that I do in fact stand up to Jewish hate. As a child of Abraham, an heir according to the promise, I think this is important. So I even got my sticker here ready to go. I think that's the right orientation for that sticker. So I'm going to put that somewhere important so people will know that I, in fact, stand up against Jewish hatred. So moving right along, though, one of the first books I have here is It's a Conspiracy. Now, this is one I reviewed. I found this in a Half Price Books probably a couple of years ago or so, and reviewed it when I got it. And I got it really expecting it to just be kind of a bubblegum kind of stupid book, and it actually had some really good stuff in it. I was pleasantly surprised, and it is still available out there online. And the reason I'm kicking off this list with this is one of the important stories in here, or one of the important conspiracies that's in here, is on page 115, and it's Little Naira's Tale. And this, of course, was published in 1992. So this would have been fresh off the press about after that happened. But this is all about the Naira, the Kuwaiti girl that was the daughter of the Kuwaiti ambassador, that was coached by Hill and Knowlton, who had Hill and Knowlton hired her an acting coach and everything. And Hill and Knowlton staged this whole thing about the incubator babies that little Naira had been working in a hospital in Kuwait and had watched Iraqi soldiers come into the hospital and throw Kuwaiti babies out of these incubators onto the floor to die as they were storming the hospital. And she gave this tearful testimony before Congress, but it was done in such a way so they wouldn't perjure themselves, whereas at a special human rights conference or something that was not in an official building. I think it was held at like a hotel. But all these efforts were done so that no one was ever guilty of perjury. And then when George H.W. Bush quoted Nair, he was just quoting, he was just saying what she had said. So, but that was used as a catalyst to get people motivated, emotionally motivated to go to war with Iraq the first time around, in 1990. That one kind of straddled 1990 and 1991. And it's really important to know how that all went down and the role of Hill and Knowlton, the public relations agency, and how they did all that, because the people who do this sort of thing, that guide us into wars repeatedly and all that, they are very uncreative people, and they use the same playbook over and over and over again. And in fact, I saw just the other day online on YouTube or someplace, somebody had put together a compilation of a lot of the current stuff directed at Venezuela, and a lot of it was almost verbatim of what led us into Iraq the second time around. So anyway, excellent book. It has some other good ones in here as well. And I should have included this the other day on my essay books, because there were some in here that kind of surprised me that they made it into a book like this. Because a lot of these will be very kind of bubblegum-esque and stay very surface level. But this is, despite its style, it actually hits on some pretty important stuff. Now, this one is kind of in the sack for the same reason. This is Toxic Sludge is Good For You. I've talked about this one before. This one is from, I believe, the mid-90s. This is from 1995. And this one and Trust Us, We're Experts are both excellent books that expose all the dirty dealings of the public relations industry. Now, this is definitely from all these books kind of go all across the political spectrum. This one is more from the left side of it, but you'll find that as you travel this landscape, you'll find that there's no political party has a monopoly on liars. They're pretty evenly spread throughout political parties, and that's the point. That gets us to very foolishly think the Republicans will rescue us or the Democrats will rescue us. So these guys are pretty firmly rooted in the left, and I doubt they would ever write this book again, because a lot of this serves as kind of a Rosetta Stone to unravel a lot of the foolishness of things like the COVID-19 stuff that happened. So, but excellent information also on this and the role of Hill and Knowlton in the whole Naira thing and starting the Iraq War. And also, I'm pretty sure it's in this one, there's also a thing about where a public relations agency found a very unstable guy to plant an explosive device that I can't remember if it was live or not. And I tried to find the story before recording this video, but essentially it was done to discredit this environmental group, that to make them look unhinged and all. They found a guy that was part of this movement that was not quite right, and then egged him on to do this, basically what amounted to a bomb scare, but then it was used to discredit that whole movement. So it's important to know how those things work, and it's important to not have blinders on about left and right when you read this stuff and see that, again, it's no party is immune from this kind of foolishness. Now, this is one that I think is real important just for this one part of this. This is the OG false flag attack. This is the Kennedy assassination, and a book called Were We Controlled?, which was one of the first ones that ever really delved into the possibility of mind control being a part of the Kennedy assassination. This was published under pseudonym of Lincoln Lawrence. And I don't know if anyone has come out and figured out who Lincoln Lawrence actually was or not. It even says on the back, it says Lincoln Lawrence has written for newspapers magazines, broadcast media for over 25 years. He has been a network TV news commentator, blah, 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 and all that. But it says this guy is writing under a pseudonym for this. And this was from 1967. So this is only 4 years or so after the assassination. And he has an interesting passage, and this is the main reason I wanted to get this out, because a lot of false flag type events rely on a patsy or rely on someone being controlled or put into a situation or to be the fall guy or whatever that might have something have done to their head. And he brings this up here and talking about Dr. Jose Delgado, which I've also talked about on this channel, who was one of the first guys to really pioneer work in brain receivers for behavior modification. And that book I have reviewed elsewhere on the channel. I think it's called Physical Control of the Mind by Dr. Jose Delgado. And it's all about putting hardware in people's heads. And he's writing that from the perspective of this would be a good thing. This is how I think it's subtitled Toward a Psycho-Civilized Society. Like you can get the bad thoughts out by putting the radio chips in your head. Although Dr. Delgado modestly avoids emphasizing the Spain episode in Conversations at Yale, and that's where he put a receiver in a bull's head and stopped its aggression, he nevertheless has a series of large photographic blow-ups of himself and the bull on the wall behind him. If you gaze at the pictures of the experiments on the wall and Dr. Delgado at the desk in 1965, you must notice that in Spain, Dr. Delgado was an athletic and striking black-haired figure of a man who might even have stopped the bull bravely with a sword instead of a radio transmitter. Across the desk from you, supposedly a matter of months later, sits the distinguished gray-haired scientist of the moment. Why this unseeming skepticism? Why this cynical probing and doubting as to whether we are being handed ancient history instead of the real news about ESB? That's electronic stimulation of the brain or something to that effect. So vital to the understanding of RHIC? And then he goes on to explain. Let us compare. So he's saying that this doctor might well have pioneered this technology way before it was publicly announced. Let us compare the doctor's announcements with a paper offered by another well-qualified man of science. We refer to the late L.L. Vasily. Anyway, I'm going to move on to he's talking about the electronic way to initiate hypnosis in a subject. And that's what's called RHIC. It should be noted that when we move a little further in the direction of RHIC, as hypnotism is introduced into the procedure, here are excerpts. As a control of the subject's condition, when she was outside the laboratory in another set of experiments, a radio setup was used. Not many experiments of this sort were carried out, but the results obtained indicate that the method of using radio signals substantially enhances the experimental possibilities. The date of this paper and for those experiments was 1934, 31 years before Yale's news announcement. And he goes on to explain two different techniques of two electronic things, or what RHIC and EDOM. And RHIC, I believe, stands for radio hypnotic intercerebral control or something. And EDOM is electronic dissolution of memory, that he alleges that there was a program also to create this, what he calls EDOM. And here, I'll put this up here. This has been reprinted, thankfully. This was kind of a unicorn for a while. But electronic dissolution of memory is like what you see in Men in Black, that uses a radio frequency, but it has to be in contact with the person that can disrupt the way the brain forms memories. So very interesting stuff when you're dealing with, remotely hypnotizing someone and also being able to wipe their memory of recent events. Is curious, especially when you look at things like Sirhan Sirhan, who claims he doesn't remember any of the actual shooting. Now, this one is not quite in the same vein as some of the other things as far as, straight up false flags, but this is all about what has happened in Syria over the last really now 15 years or so. And ever since the Civil War, and remember the white helmets and all of that, and basically showing how our mass media rebrands these, into moderate rebels, these actual contra groups, these like mercenaries essentially, and rebrands them as good guy rebels in order to get public support for a war effort. And this is considered a lot more shrewd way to accomplish things than going into an overt war with Iraq, because you're using the guys on the ground, the locals, and then, as we're seeing now, a lot of those guys get mopped up later on once they're done with them. But this is an excellent book, and it's a quick read that's all about how the tactics used to use these rebel groups, these rebel factions, and kind of rebrand them for public consumption in the West, and how these events are staged using snipers and things to get one group to wind up fighting the other. All of that, I think, is really important in understanding a lot of the Middle East situation today, and a lot of this applies to the Maidan coup and what happened in Ukraine in 2014. So lots of good information there that show that this can be much bigger than just a patsy somewhere. And this, of course, I think was published in 2015 or so. No, 2012. But again, excellent information. And now we have a literal straight up Al-Qaeda dude running Syria now, but he's wearing a suit. So, and I've done some videos about that as well that are around, I think it might even be under a review for Subverting Syria. So that one's out there as well, because there's a lot of information, a lot of strange, crazy stuff that's happened in Syria that's flown way under the radar in the West. Now, this is another one that's kind of false flag adjacent. This is Camelio by Robert Guffey. And I put this in here mainly because, again, this is a good first-person account of someone who lived through some crazy stuff happening to one of his friends and watched as this guy was driven crazy by like mind control technology and gang stalking and a lot of crazy stuff. The only strange thing about this is Robert Guffey makes a point of letting you know he's a Mason. And then he has a point where he talks to another Mason about this idea of this cloaking device, this invisibility technology. And so it's a weird aside that's kind of shoved in there like, hey guys, I'm a friendly, don't take me out. So it's a weird, the way that's put into the book is definitely kind of odd. But overall, excellent book. In fact, I think a relative of Robert Guffey, or the guy that's featured in this book, commented on one of my older videos about this and said that, yeah, it was pretty crazy the way it all went down. But this is a great account of, again, someone who is the victim of this kind of advanced mind control, this kind of EDOM, RHIC, that kind of stuff, and allegedly started out because he stole some equipment from, or was accused of stealing some equipment from like a military base in the San Diego area, and then just all hell breaks loose. And it is a crazy story. So definitely worth reading for that. This guy was subjected to all kinds of stuff in order to try to force him to just go insane. So and eventually he just has to basically go on the run for a while in order to maintain his sanity. But this is one I started reading and definitely couldn't put it down. I read this on vacation, I think back in like 2017 or so. Very good book, but pretty crazy stuff in this one. But anyway, that is Camelio, a strange but true story of invisible spies, heroin addiction, and homeland security by Robert Guffey. And this will just give you a good idea about kind of the state of the art of some of the high-tech gadgetry that is turned loose on some of these guys when they get out of line. And this is from 2015. Moving right along, this one might be a little bit harder to find. This is Taking Sides by Stephen Green. This has an interesting section about the USS Liberty. If you're watching this channel and you don't know about the USS Liberty, definitely go down that rabbit hole tonight. Look up Operation Cyanide, which I think is like a Channel 4 or BBC documentary. You could probably watch the whole thing for free on the YouTubes. But this is has an excellent section about the USS Liberty and about a lot of the crazy stuff that went down in the founding of the nation state of political Israel. I make that distinction. I won't go too far into it right now for this video, but I do not believe the political entity Israel is in any way connected to the biblical entity of Israel or the dude named Israel in the Old Testament. And I think that's real important to distinguish. I don't believe modern nation state Israel is a fulfillment of biblical prophecy or anything of the sort. And if you read this book, you definitely think that, because Stephen Green definitely peels back the curtain and you see a lot of the dirty dealings that led to the creation of the modern Zionist state. And it's some nasty stuff. But the attack on the USS Liberty is one of those false flag events that if there had not been survivors, we might well have nuked Cairo. And he doesn't go into all that here. Some of that is in Operation Cyanide, the documentary. And there's also a whole book called Operation Cyanide that investigative reporter, a British investigative reporter, uncovered that the whole plan was a plot between LBJ and the Israeli government to bring the United States into a war with Israel, into a war against Egypt on behalf of Israel. And to do that, they blew up the USS Liberty. So the USS Liberty was out patrolling the Mediterranean, but they had been moved into position just for this, and they were attacked relentlessly with unmarked aircraft. They first scoped it out with regular Israeli fighter planes and then flew back and then came back with unmarked planes and attacked the ship. And everything was designed to make it look like it was an attack by Egypt. And these guys miraculously were able to radio for help and string up more radio wire and signal for help, even as they were having the deck of the ship napalmed and some of the guys machine gunned. It's still one of the worst peacetime naval disasters, I guess, if you want to call it that. But it was 34 were killed and I think 171 wounded. And it was a bloodbath. I mean, they torpedoed the ship and almost sunk it with a torpedo boat. And then they even flew up to it with helicopters later, about to drop guys on the ship to finish everybody off. And the guys that were left on the ship, they had a lot of fight in them, and they weren't about to let that happen. And I think one of the few things that probably prevented those guys getting just completely wiped out was there had been a Russian ship in the area too. And the Operation Cyanide, and he doesn't get into all this, what I'm talking about here, but a Russian ship actually escorted them back for a little ways. So I think when they realized that not everybody died and there might have been some Russian witnesses to this whole thing, because the whole idea was to bring the United States in to a war against Egypt, and that way they could keep the Soviets out. They could say, hey, Egypt, in their stupidity, they attacked an American ship, so we're just retaliating for what they did. Whereas if they just attacked Egypt, the Soviets would have said, hey, that's, one of our client states, we're going to back them up. And what's really tragic about the USS Liberty is these guys were basically just left to die. And even after they had radioed for help and everybody knew they needed help, they had to limp all the way back, I believe, to Greece on their own without, again, they had a Soviet ship escorting them, which they were kind of not exactly thrilled about that. But that was, no one came to their aid until they got back to port. And then the whole incident was hushed up for decades. And that Mr. Green was one of the first ones to really blow the lid off of that. This book is, I believe, from 1984. But that whole episode, if it had gone slightly different, as the documentary Operation Cyanide talks about, that nuclear-armed F-4 Phantoms were on their way to Cairo before they realized, oh, wait, they're survivors and things did not go quite as planned, and they recalled those fighters. But had things gone even slightly different that day, the United States very well could have nuked Cairo on behalf of Israel. And I think that's kind of an important thing to think about. And we'll get more into that here in a little bit. But that is Taking Sides, America's Secret Relations with a Militant Israel by Stephen Green. And then, of course, we got the OG classic here, Behold a Pale Horse by the late William Cooper, who sadly was gunned down by, I believe, state police in Arizona. And this is another one that I think is important for, if nothing else in this book, this passage right here, where he's talking about something called a project, I think, by the CIA called Orion. And this was written all the way back in 91, I believe. Yeah, 1991. And this is the original edition. Some people have told me there's different versions out there that have some of this excised from it. The government encouraged the manufacture and importation of military firearms for the criminals to use. This is intended to foster a feeling of insecurity, which would lead the American people to voluntarily disarm themselves by passing laws against firearms, using drugs and hypnosis on mental patients in a process called Orion. The CIA inculcated the desire in these people to open fire on schoolyards and thus inflame the anti-gun lobby. This plan is well underway and so far is working perfectly. The middle class is begging the government to do away with the Second Amendment. And then he has this special author's note here that I'm going to read. Author's note. I have found that these events have indeed happened all over the country. In every instance that I've investigated, the incident at the women's school in Canada, the shopping center in Canada, the Stockton, California massacre, and the murder of Rabbi Meir Kahane, the shooters were all ex-mental patients or were current mental patients who were all on the drug Prozac. This drug, when taken in certain doses, increases the serotonin level in the patient, causing extreme violence. Couple that with a post-hypnotic suggestion or control through an electronic brain implant or microwave or ELF intrusion, and you get mass murder, ending in every case with the suicide of the perpetrator. Exhume the bodies of the murderers and check for a brain implant. I think you are going to be surprised. In every case, the name of the murderer's doctor or mental treatment facility has been withheld. I believe we will be able to establish intelligence community connections and or connections to known CIA experimental mind control programs when we finally discover who these doctors of death really are. So, interesting information about psychotropic meds and their role in some of that. And more of that kind of information is coming out. And there was an interesting thing with regards to the stuff happening in Syria when the Russian military went in. And this is back before I used to follow Anna News and RT back, and Anna News was is a Russian news outlet, and I used to follow that pretty close back before all that got censored, and that got shut down. I think right around the time of COVID. But once they shut that down, that was unfortunate because that was a great way to kind of check everybody through watching different news outlets across the globe. But the Anna News Network, I believe it was on there that they had the Russian military, once they captured one of these ISIS strongholds, they found a shipping container full of psychotropic meds. And I forget which drug it was, but one of the fighters that they were interviewing said that they would give them these drugs that would make them lose their mind. And if you remember that whole period of 2012 through, up to fairly recently, there was a lot of insane atrocities committed by the moderate rebels. One of the worst, one of the craziest ones that kind of blew up in everybody's face, kind of destroyed the whole narrative of peaceful moderate rebels, was one of the moderate rebels was filmed cutting the heart out of a Syrian soldier's chest on film. This was all on, made it into fairly mainstream, it was on Twitter and everything else, and cut this guy's heart out, took a bite of it, and was yelling something at the same time. And when it became clear that this was one of the moderate rebels, this created a little bit of a PR crisis, because I don't know about you, I've been pretty upset before. I've had people I've been pretty mad at for a variety of reasons. I have never felt inclined to cut someone's heart out and take a bite out of someone else's heart. That's not a natural reaction to any of the stressors, the typical stressors of combat that I can think about. And that's the way it was presented to the public of, well, this guy, it was basically almost like he'd had a really bad day. And I think that story broke in like late 2013 or so. But that really blew up the whole narrative of that it's moderate rebels versus Assad. And that was when, right around that time, that was when they introduced ISIS and said, oh no, it's ISIS, and then you got the moderate rebels, and so now we're fighting ISIS. So now you know that there's these psychotic guys out there eating people's hearts. We're actually fighting those people. Those are the bad guys that we're trying to get rid of, and Assad. You know, because Assad is obviously a bad guy because he let these heart-eating people loose in his country. But anyway, I think that role of psychotropic meds and the connection to patsies and all that is an important thing to consider. And of course, like you said, and this is of course is from now 34 years ago, all those just zombie-like killers, people taking guns, and I think recently, just a couple of days ago, there was a guy very zombie-like with a bolt-action rifle. But I'm going to stay away from that because, you know, stop the hate. Hold on here. Stand up to Jewish hate. So there you go. I am a party line guy this evening. This is, again, one of the original books on this topic. This was one of the first books that ever came out about 9/11. This is 9/11, The Big Lie by Thierry Mossad, and I'm a French dude. I don't know, I'm not doing his name justice. This book still holds up surprisingly well now 24 years later. And one of the interesting things about this goes through a pretty good theory about that he believes that there was most likely the planes were using some kind of radio beacon in the towers and guided remotely into those towers with nobody on board. Or if there was anybody on board, they were already deceased at that point. Some excellent information in here, and probably one of the main things. So this is just a good primer on the 9/11 attack. And in this, there's an interesting section towards the end where he's talking about that these special codes for communicating with the mobile White House, the Air Force One, had been compromised, and saying that essentially that a third party, that essentially a coup had occurred that day. And I'm paraphrasing the way he says this in here. And at the time, that was kind of tough for me to get my mind around, because I'm thinking, okay, if this was an inside job, how is that a coup? Like, I don't get it. But then you start understanding other foreign influences and how those foreign influences could use that to then take over the civilian or the front-facing part of our government. It starts to make a little bit more sense. And then you start understanding things like the role of AIPAC and all that, and the magic eye puzzle all starts coming together. I don't know if any of y'all watching this are old enough to remember, but in the early 90s, there were these magic eye puzzles that people would get as posters, and you'd see them hanging up in people's offices. And you had to stand there and kind of look cross-eyed at it for it to come into view. And when it did, all of a sudden this, what looked like just this almost like static, when your eyes focused on it just right, it suddenly looked like this three-dimensional picture of like a fighter plane floating in space, or a building, or butterfly or whatever. But all of a sudden it would just transform into this very crude three-dimensional image. And it was pretty cool, but you had to sit there and look at it just right to get it. And that's kind of how a lot of this information is, because once you see it, like those magic eye pictures, once you see them and you train your eyes how to look at it, as soon as you look at one, you kind of refocus your eyes. You're like, oh, okay, I see it. And it's immediate. But before you do that, then it all looks like just a big mess of information. So kind of like a lot of this stuff right here. Now, this is, of course, by way of deception, which I've reviewed elsewhere on this channel. This is by Victor Ostrovsky and Claire Hoy. Excellent book about the Israeli Mossad. And I mainly bring this up because it's important to understand the motto of the Israeli Mossad is, by way of deception, thou shalt do war. And their whole MO is false flag sort of activities. So I think that's a really important thing to understand, that whole intelligence apparatus, that is their operating motto. And then if you're familiar with the Hannibal Directive, which is not part of this book, but the Hannibal Directive is the Israeli directive within the Israeli military that they will kill their own people to prevent them from being taken hostage. So make of that whatever you will, but that's pretty messed up that you don't want them to fall into the hands of the bad brown people, so you kill them yourself first. And that is the Hannibal Directive. That alone is pretty messed up. But this is all about, Victor Ostrovsky was a Mossad officer. And this is a great look behind the curtain in how the Mossad operates, how they compromise someone and turn them into an asset, how they use blackmail and all the things. And I've talked about this before, about the use of Syonim, which is other loyal Jewish Zionists that might be in some capacity as a civilian to help them out. And they're called upon to do so with no payment or anything like that. They're just expected to do so on behalf of the nation state of Israel. So that very idea of Syonim is very troubling, just because that casts suspicion on anyone who's out there supporting the nation state of political Israel. So that can be a big problem. But great information in this. And I should say, with all these books, there's no one of them that I would say is just a perfect book with perfect information and take everything exactly as it is. Just like I wouldn't say sit down and watch your television and take it in uncritically. All of these guys like Victor Ostrovsky, I'm sure when you read this, you could definitely tell there's a lot of stuff that he could probably tell a lot more if he wanted to. But he also likes being on this side of the grave. So he stopped short of that. And there's a lot of these guys that you get that idea that for one reason or another, they might be pulling some of their punches. Some maybe out of ignorance, others willfully so. But that's why it's a good idea to read a large body of material. And that's why on my channel, I have a lot of original source material, stuff that I disagree with militantly, but I like to use that to weigh out against some of the other material. So the more discernment you possess, the better off you will be in navigating all of this stuff. And speaking of discernment, now we're at the final one, James Bamford and Body of Secrets. And James Bamford has written another book called The Puzzle Palace, which I don't think I've reviewed yet, which is all about just the NSA. And Body of Secrets is his follow-up book about more stuff about the NSA. This also has a section about the USS Liberty, the attack on the USS Liberty. And he spins it slightly different. He makes it more out to be more like it's very intentional. He still holds that Israel intentionally attacked the USS Liberty, but he says they did so because the USS Liberty was an intelligence gathering ship that was actually used for the NSA, and a big portion of its crew were NSA employees, were actually NSA officers, but on a Navy ship. And they had incredible listening capabilities where they could intercept pretty much every kind of communication of the day. And he claims that they intercepted communications about war crimes that the Israelis were committing, and that Israel attacked the ship to stop that, to destroy that evidence. I think there's Possibly that could be maybe a motive, but I think the Operation Cyanide thing holds a little bit more water, just because that when you realize how many other people had to go along with this on the U.S. side, it doesn't make sense that Johnson would just be like, "Ah, shucks, she had to go kill one of some of our people." And then when you realize Johnson's complicit in it and had to give his approval, and McNamara and all those guys went along with it, you start to understand this was part of a broader scheme that just didn't play out the way they hoped it would. So I think the USS Liberty is a very important event to see what happens when a false flag event doesn't go as planned. But there's a lot of information in this book. It's definitely a lot to digest. And this came out right around the time of 9/11. And what I'm about to tell you about, there are people with varying opinions about what I'm about to tell you next. This is from 2001. So yeah, May 2001. So this was published a few months prior to 9/11. He talks about these documents called Operation Northwoods. And Operation Northwoods was a plan by, I believe, the Joint Chiefs of Staff during the Kennedy administration, that they were putting forth this plan of remotely flying a plane and trying to deliberately get it shot down by Cuba in order to initiate a war with Cuba, to generate public support for a war with Cuba. Because again, that's kind of the whole thing with a false flag attack, is if big country attacks a little country, if you got if you have, say, like the biggest dude in the school, the dude that's the power lifter, judo champion, and all that kind of stuff, and he just goes over and just starts pounding on the dude in the chess club, you're gonna be like, okay, hey, this is not cool at all. Okay, but what if you could make it look like that guy in the chess club had it coming? What if the guy in the chess club, you find out, or you think you found out, that he's actually been going and letting the air out of the guy's tires and like trying to break into his house at night and do stuff to him. And finally, this powerlifting judo champ has had enough, and he goes and wipes the walls with this kid on the chess club. So if you feel like this guy had it coming, you're more inclined to be like, dude, what were you thinking? That was really stupid. And the same thing goes with stuff like with Afghanistan and 9/11. That was the prevailing attitude amongst most of the people when that happened was, man, Afghanistan, why are y'all hiding Osama bin Laden? That's really stupid. How would you let that happen? And so everybody was mindlessly cheering it on, and we had our Toby Keith song to accompany the war effort, and that was that. So that's basically what the Northwoods documents was proposing, was this idea of how you could falsify an attack on a plane load of U.S. students is what was proposed, because that would be the most sympathetic the sympathetic victims. And they even proposed the idea of a sniper in the D.C. area, a Cuban sniper, to just randomly be picking people off, and that also could be used to promote this war effort against Cuba. And the fascinating thing is to see that this was actually planned, that this is not fantasy. The Northwoods documents are a real thing. Now, there are some debates about some of the particulars of that. Some people believe the Northwoods documents are in of themselves a possible disinfo tactic. Whether or not that's true, the fact remains that the Northwoods documents are in fact actual documents. And the fact that that does line up with a lot of the things going on at the time, what's important to look at there is that was a potential plan to be enacted. And allegedly Kennedy shot that down, no pun intended. So anyway, I think those are all important books. I will wrap it up. I'm going to end on that note. But I think these are all important books, and still, I think, relatively easy to come by books for those of you wanting to dig a little deeper into false flag events and understand those things. And I think in the current climate, I think it's a really good idea to be well versed in some of these past events. Because one of the frustrating things, especially with the war in Iraq, both of them, the one in 1990 and the one in 2000 that started in 2003, both of those used a lot of disinformation and a lot of political foolishness to get those things started. And the sad thing is, like the weapons of mass destruction, if you bring that up now, people laugh that off. They're like, ah, shucks, who could have known? And just the other day in one of my comment sections, somebody was like, yeah, but you wouldn't have been able to know that in real time. It's like, yeah, you would actually. If you're not if you're not emotionally invested in your television set, you will know. Like, these things will scream deception at you. And there are plenty of other people like the weapons inspector David Kelly that came forward, and Scott Ritter, that were all saying, no, this is BS. We're walking into a major disaster. And there are plenty of people that are out there shouting, truth in the face of all these lies. The sad thing is those people typically get canceled or shut out or whatever. So it is possible to know what is in fact really going on as long as you are not married to your television set. So I will stop there. I don't know how long I went on this, but I heard the clock chime at least once. So I appreciate your patience if you made it to the end. Again, I think given some of the things that have happened just over the weekend, I think it's a really good idea to be on high alert given all of this stuff. And of course, do your part to stop the hate, because I got my pen here. So I am a party line guy for sure. But I hope you all are having a good week so far, and I'll be posting some more stuff soon enough, and I'll find something I can put this hashtag blue square sticker on. So, and I'm even going to put the hashtag blue square on this video so our reptilian overlords know that I am a compliant member of the proletariat.